Okay, Boker Tov, everybody, on what is nothing more than a Boker Kashe. It's a tough morning. Um, the Pigua by the Mahsom has already claimed one life. We have at least 7 other people who are injured. We pray that they shall come out of this healthy, Bezrat Hashem, and the people who are there but not injured physically, who witnessed what happened, they should have refuah shlema as well. That's why when we say it in Mishaberach, we say refuat nefesh or refuat guf. Refuat nefesh doesn't mean physical; it means their spiritual and mental health also needs to be taken into account. We also learned today for a soldier who fell among many who was injured earlier and then died a couple of days ago. Ma'oz ben Barda Devora, Hashem Yikom Damo, and also for refuah shlema for all the psuim from the war, again, both mentally and physically. Okay. Tov. Let me get the first Mishne on the screen here. We are going to go into the next Mishne. If you remember, we said that Hillel said there's 3 Mishnayot in a row of Hillel. One we already did. One is this one, and the next one is probably one of the most famous Mishnayot that exists, which is Ima Einanili Mili, which we will Bezrat Hashem get to in just a little while. So I'm going to read this one. The obvious question that will come up with this particular Mishnah, it's not the only one like this, but it's one of the few. That's in Aramaic. It's not in Hebrew. If you remember, Aramaic was what's called the lingua franca, or the language of the people of the country that the Jews were living in when they were in Bavel / Persia / Iraq. And we'll come to that, why it's in Aramaic. And it's also a bit of a disconcerting Mishnah that Hillel said. Hu Mary used to say, Naged Shema, a person who wants to make his name great, Aved Shema, he will cause his name to be lost or destroyed. Udolo Mosif, a person who does not add to his knowledge. We're not talking about knowing a higher level of math, which is also work of God, but it means Torah. If you have a level of Torah that you're at and you're satisfied and you don't want to add anything to that, you're safe. Then what you actually already know will start to decrease or even stop. Udolo Yalef, a person who doesn't learn at all. The Torah it's a zero. It doesn't have anything to do with their lives. Ktala Chayav. Technically, he's chayav mita. He's worthy of a death sentence. Again, we obviously have to talk about that. And someone who makes use of the crown of Torah will pass away. Okay, so there's obviously quite a bit of stuff here to talk about. Let's first talk about why it's in Aramaic. When I introduced Hillel to the class, one of the things I said was, unlike Shammai, who was born here in Israel, Hillel was born in Bavel, in Babylonia, and he made Aliyah to Israel. He did it without Nefesh B'Nefesh. He did it without El. He was able to be successful in his Aliyah. Baruch Hashem. So it's possible and highly likely that this particular statement of Hillel was something that he was saying very often in Bavel, and it would have been said in Aramaic, which again was the language of the people. Remember that when it says, and we talked about this a few times, when it says Hu Haya Omer, does not mean he said. It means he said he used to say. It means it was something that he said on a frequent basis and he was known for. So evidently when he was in Bavel, one of the ways he potentially, looks like, tried to motivate people into learning and to growing would be these statements. Okay, so let's first break this down a little bit into some general ideas and talk a little bit more in depth on some of them. What does it mean, Naged Shema Aved Shema? That a person who tries to make his name great, his name will be destroyed or be lost. Rashi tells us a couple possibilities. On the one hand, he says that when a person's name is great, means technically, in theory, he's very well known. If he's very well known, he has a lot of public pressures, potentially could be familial pressures. There's things that happen to a person the more well known they are. We know this from our own life experience, not ours. I'm saying when we see, whether it's movie stars or Torah scholars or just, and not to put them in the same category, God forbid, but people are very well known. They have a lot of pressures, and their name does not necessarily just mean their good name, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but it means also their lives. It's a tremendous pressure on themselves that the fact that their name could be gone could be from the fact from these pressures and have a deleterious effect on their lives. we have to also consider the other side of the coin. Shlomo HaMelech says in Kohelet, Tov Shem, Mishem Tov. Better to have a good name than good oil. Oil represents money. A person's name is critical because if an individual says, you can rely on me, or so-and-so said it's okay, there's what's called a gushpanka, the Aramaic word for like a seal or a stamp of approval. The name comes sometimes the gushpanka. For example, someone messaged me the other day with a question, and they found a source for the answer on a particular website. They did not know whether this was a good website or not. You can go online, you can look for answers to your questions, and you can find all kinds of answers. And I said, just without even looking at the answer, I already said it's okay. You can use whatever. I still looked at it, but you can still rely on the answer because the website was something that's, oh, sorry, I have to answer this. Ange? Yeah. Eliana. Here. Just a second. Hold on 1 second. No, it's okay. 1 second. Okay. My daughter's stuck in all this traffic right now with the baby screaming. Okay. So the Tov, let me call her back then. Tov Shem Mishem and Tov means that a person's good name. So when I said that this website, that I have to know some of the people behind the website, not personally, I said, yes, 100% you can rely on that. That's the concept of a good name. We're talking about here where someone proactively tries to make their name well known. They're very much into themselves. It's about gava. It's about pride and haughtiness. Remember, we talked many times in Mesilat Yesharim, the difference between pride and being proud. You're allowed to be proud of yourself, but pride is not something that's a good characteristic. So this type of person, if he thinks it's all about himself and leads to narcissism, sorry, buddy, it doesn't work that way. Rabbeinu Yonah tells us this idea that what I just said, I forgot to quote his name. Rabbeinu Yonah said that a person's desire for this gava, this or seeking out this haughtiness, is his downfall. Now, interestingly enough, why it's also important to understand a little bit about a person who says these various statements or these comments, it also informs us about how he came to this statement. Where is the Rabbeinu Yonah? It's obvious. I mean, even I didn't have to go to Rabbeinu Yonah to see that this is obviously an inyan or an issue of pride. But Rabbeinu Yonah wrote a book called Sharei Tshuva. Sharei Tshuva is all about, obviously, tshuva, about doing repenting. Where did that come from? So the time of the Rambam, when the Rambam was not as well accepted, when he wrote the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed, many people put him in cherem. And not only they put him in cherem, means they put him in excommunication because he was promulgating ideas that were just, that was not seen before in Judaism. It was a matter of, they not only put him in cherem, but they also burned his books. There was almost a mass burning of the books of the Rambam. Then, as a result, they say as a direct result of that, was in the late 1200s in France, they burned 24 cartloads of the Talmud, which there's a kina for on Tisha B'Av. And remember, that's all handwritten. 24 cartloads was the vast majority of the existing printed Talmud at the time in that part of the world. Rabbeinu Yonah saw that as a direct result of his and other people going out against the Rambam and burning his books. And he decided to go from community to community to make sure that the name of the Rambam was ensconced in purity. So the name of the Rambam, which had been besmirched by Rabbeinu Yonah himself and others, he took upon himself to make sure the name was made to be proper. And it wasn't that the Rambam was looking for the kavod. It wasn't that the Rambam was looking to get his name out there. He just was prolific as an author and a codifier of Jewish law. And that's what happened. So understanding Rabbeinu Yonah, what his history was important for us to understand why he looks at this part of the first Mishnah here and sees this idea of gava. If a person learns, the second statement here says, Udolo mosif yasef. If a person does not add to his knowledge, then he causes it to cease. That's the English I have here. Why? Why? I mean, if I learned the ABCs, and if I learn the Aleph Bet, and I learn Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, and I don't do any more learning, why am I going to forget that? I'm going to give you an example, which is not a good example, I admit, up front, but it's an example I'm going to use for getting to the next step. I love language. Besides speaking Hebrew and English, I taught myself Spanish, which I can carry on a fourth grade level conversation. And I used to do pretty well in Russian. I taught myself that too, both in terms of writing and reading and speaking, at even a higher level in fourth grade. Spanish once in a great while I'll still use. Russian almost never. I can still read and write. But to carry on a conversation, I mean, I could pick up words, but there's no way I can have a conversation. It's not my mother tongue. I only started learning it at 15 years old. And it's been a few years since I was 15. And you forget if you don't review. The truth is the same thing when it comes to education in general. Some people are blessed with an incredibly good memory, and it sticks with them. And when a person doesn't learn more, somehow it's still okay. It's still okay for them to continue with keeping that memory of what they had. But after that, it could start to go downhill. But why is this okay? So you get to a certain level, you say, that's it. I don't want to add more to that. Because what you're doing is you're plateauing. And when you plateau and you decide that where I'm holding in my Judaism, this is something I've spoken about a few times, both publicly and in shiurim, that you should never, ever be satisfied with where you're at. You should be happy with where you're at, but you should never be satisfied. Am I happy with what I'm learning? Absolutely. Am I satisfied? No, I know there's so much more to do. You always want to be adding. You always want to be growing. You should always want to have an additional thing that you haven't learned before to try to start learning that. And if you don't, and you say you're happy with where you're at, and you don't add to it, yes, you're going to start to lose the knowledge base that you have. You're not going to lose everything. It doesn't work that way. But it does work the way that we are, that Hashem gave us this memory that if you don't add to it and use it and go over, it's going to be gone. Then it says, someone who doesn't learn at all, then Ketala, he's the death penalty. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that because there's one other point that I want to, actually one or two more points I still want to make on that previous statement. Person doesn't continue learning will start to lose his learning. There is a custom at the end of finishing a Masechta, a volume of Gemara, where you make a siyum and you say something called the Hadran. The Hadran is a statement of two possible meanings. One for word Hadar, which means like the glory that you're saying, you're representing and declaring the glory of the Torah you learned, meaning the actual Gemara and Mishne. The other is to return. So you say Hadran Allah, I will return to you. So it's a promise, in a sense, to come back and learn that again. So again, when a person finishes learning something in Masechta, a book of Navi, whatever it might be, and they finish it, and they've gone through it in the depth, of course, and they make a siyum, when they make the statement, Hadran Allah, that's this Mishnah. If a person doesn't add, loses out. Because in the Hadran it says I shouldn't forget, and it should stand for me as a zechut for me and my family. But it means to add more. It says to learn more svarim and learn more other things along the way. Okay, so let's talk about this next statement, which is somewhat problematic. A person who does not learn at all deserves the death penalty. What does that mean? Does it mean you take an average person who's not religious, who has no connection to Yahadut, and doesn't ever do any learning of Torah, that they should be executed? Well, God forbid. That's not what it means. That's not what it means. First of all, I want to change one translation of a word before we answer this topic. It says Udolo Yalef doesn't just mean one who doesn't study Torah at all. It potentially means somebody who has knowledge and doesn't pass it along. You see somebody who could use a little bit more understanding and help. You see somebody who needs to, you have knowledge, you should pass it along. Okay, it's not for you to hold on to. Part of the purpose of Torah, as we say in the Brachot before Shema, lilmod ulelamed lishmor v'lasot. It doesn't say lilmod v'lasot, just to learn it and to do it. It says lilmod Ulalamed. Everybody's a teacher, whether you're a parent, a neighbor, a sibling, a spouse, a child, whoever you are, whatever you are. You don't have to be an official teacher in a school or give shiurim or open a Zoom. We're all somewhat teachers. By the way, for those of you who are not aware, in Hebrew, more is a teacher. A hore with a hey is a parent. Same shoresh, hey, which is lahorot, to teach, because parents and teachers teach, and it's a never-ending job. It's lifelong. So part of this meaning is that if you want to keep the Torah just for yourself, it's a massive mistake. You have to make sure you share your Torah. But going back to this idea that a person who doesn't learn at all is chayav the death penalty. Whether he's meant that is the literal sense or in a metaphorical sense is immaterial. Doubtful he meant it in the literal sense, because there's nowhere that says that in the Torah, that a person who doesn't learn Torah is chayav the death penalty. But what does it really mean? What's the deeper meaning of that? Why are we here in this world? We are not here to just spend all day watching Netflix, go to the mall, and take a little joyride. That's part of life. That's nice. That's entertaining. That it's recreational. But we're here because we're supposed to live by Torah. Learning doesn't just mean learning Torah, physically opening a book, but it means a person who does not study Torah means a person doesn't put it into practice. Even if a person knows, and then they go ahead and they do differently because they don't care, that's throwing it back in Hashem's face, and that person, what's their life worth? The purpose of being in this world, which you talked about in so many other venues, serving Hashem. Imagine you go to you go to a restaurant, you sit down, they bring you a menu, and you look at the menu, you give it back to the waiter or the waitress, and then you just sit there. I mean, what are you doing there? Just taking up space. You go to the restaurant because you want to eat. You're given the menu to see what you want. Well, this is a little bit different. You're given a menu from Hashem of what you need to do in this world, how you serve Hashem. So you take the menu, i.e. the Torah, you look at it, and you give it, thank you very much, God, have a nice day. I mean, so what are you doing here? This does, of course, not take into account the topic of Tinok Shenishba. Tinok Shenishba literally means a child that was taken into captivity, which is a halachic term, which means a person who grew up with no knowledge. He doesn't know any better. There's a machloket if the concept of Tinok Shenishba even applies in Israel, because it's kind of hard, even if a person lives in the most remote kibbutz, secular, anti-Zionist, well, it would be anti-Zionist, but anti-religion kibbutz, it's impossible to avoid knowing about Judaism living in Israel. It's impossible. Even the Christians and the Muslims, they'll know about Judaism just look at the newspapers, listen to the advertisements, look at the time periods of the year of the Chagim. So to say someone's a Tinok Shenishba, a child that's been taken into captivity and doesn't really know any better, may or may not apply in this. But Bonagi that applies across the board. Someone who doesn't know any better, doesn't necessarily fall into this kind of a category. Someone who does know that they have a need and a requirement to learn and chooses to not, then that person says, hey, well, what's he doing here, right? Now, this kind of a person is even worse off than a person who knows and doesn't add to his knowledge, because he's purposely, in a sense, causing himself to forget and to not know things. Fine. Okay. I want to take a look. Let's see, next slide here. I'm going to just read one thing. This is Avot de Rabbi Natan. This mentioned a long time ago when we started Pirke Avot that there is a more expanded version of Pirke Avot, which is edited by Rabbi Natan, and you'll find almost exact but not exact language of Pirke Avot and Avot de Rabbi Natan, and then he expands on it. So he says as follows: Udolomosif pasid. He didn't say that someone who doesn't learn, who doesn't add to his learning, will forget. Let's just say he uses a different word. He doesn't say the word asif. He says pasi, which again means to have seed. So he'll lose out. He'll forget stuff. Why? He says as follows: Ketzad. How do we understand this statement? If a person learns one volume of Gemara or 2 or 3 Masechtot, and he doesn't add to them, Sof shemishakach et harishonot. He'll eventually forget what he originally learned, what he first learned. So that means if you take this the exact meaning, it means like this. Let's say you learn Masechta Makot one time. You learn it in depth. And then you decide you're going to add to it. So you learn Bava Batra, you learn Brachot, you learn Yevamot and all. How do you automatically remember Makot? Why is it? I mean, you could forget that too. Just while you're learning more, you can still forget what you learned in the past. I mean, I'm pretty good at that. I have almost a doctorate in forgetting things. So without even realizing it, the more you learn, the more you remember from other things. When you learn, I'm using Gemara as an example, but this applies to Tanakh, it applies to Mishnah, it applies to almost every area of Torah you can think of. Let's say you're learning, you learn, again, Masechet Makot. I'm picking on Makot because I taught it 6 times in school over the years, and it's probably the Masechet that sticks here in my head. So let's say you learn Masechet Makot, and then you don't open it up for 5-10 years. But in the meantime, you're learning other Gemaras. And you're learning Brachot, and you're learning Bava Batra and other things, and then you say, wait a minute. I don't know, without even looking on the references on the side of the page, you see that there are other topics. Like, this sounds very familiar. What the learning and continual learning does, continuous education, is it sparks certain ideas in your head that connect to other things you've learned. And that itself helps you to recall the others. Now, there is a concept in learning known as chazara. Means it's really chazara, but chazara, the yeshiva speak, which means review. It means you learn the Gemara and then you review it. There are people who are very good at that. People are not very good at that. I go over my stuff because I come back to it in a new cycle, but I don't sit there and go over the same thing 3 or 4 times a day. I never could do that. Many times, if you learn in depth in yeshivot, you'll have seder, you'll learn, and then you'll go to the Gemara in class, and then the next seder, you're supposed to go over what you learned and all. That's good. And for some people, that's very helpful to remind themselves. There are all kinds of learning aids that are out there now. Something came out a number of years ago called Simanim, where for every daf in the Gemara, there's a siman, a 2-letter or 2-word reminder of what the daf is about. It usually has to do with something, a word that has to do with the daf, and it's supposed to be a reminder. It's brilliant. But whatever works for you, and whatever works for you means trying to not just add to your Torah-based knowledge, which is obvious, but is whatever you have to try to review it at times, to understand it, to keep it in your head. And that's what it's telling us from Avot the Rabbi Natan. Okay. Yeah, let's hold on, put this in the wrong order. Okay, let me come back to that. Okay, next Mishnah. This Mishnah, like I say, is probably one of the most well-known Mishnayot. And I did an experiment. I went into Google. For those of you who shun the internet, you might have heard of Google. And I typed in the words, Im ein ani li mi li. Hillel says, if I'm not for myself, then who is for me? It came up with 38,000 references. Now, not all of them obviously have to do with the Mishnah, but some were songs, it's all over the place. And it's quoted and it's also become part of the parlance in English as well. If I'm not for myself, then who am I for? Who's for me? Okay, but right now let's just do pshat to understand the basic meaning of this Mishnah. Actually, I did want to do that story. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to this. This has to do. Oh, you know what? I didn't finish the other Mishnah. I'll tell you, this Sigua has really thrown me off today. Let's look at the last part here, and then we'll go back to the Mishnah before that comes up after. Udishtamish betaga chalaf. A person who uses his crown of Torah, of his learning, will pass away. This is a bookend to the first part. This also has to do with gava, with pride, but it's even worse. This isn't just someone wants to make a name for himself. They use it to influence. It does not mean that they're going to use it for right influence necessarily. Maybe yes, maybe no, but you're not supposed to use, we're going to see expressions not supposed to be used as a shovel to dig. No, the Torah is not there to help you. It's here to help you in your life. It's not there to help you to make use of it to get something done. Like, hey, listen, I'm a big Talmid Chacham, and you shouldn't give me that traffic ticket, even though I was speeding, because then you're trying to use your Torah, your crown Torah, for your own personal use. That's not what it's for at all. So the idea of making use of it is not just gava, it's not just haughtiness, but you're antithetical to the purpose of Torah. Torah is there for us to use for ourselves, for our personal growth, for halacha, and how to live. Now, having said that, there's an interesting story that I want to read to you. Make this a little bigger. Maaseh Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish has an interesting history himself, which I'm not going to get into. He was not a good person and went through an interesting little event. And you want to look it up there, you in the Gemara, in Google, you can look up Reish Lakish's history. And if not, wait till we get to it in Jewish history, which Bezrat Hashem will talk about him. Maaseh Reish Lakish. There's an incident that happened with Reish Lakish. He was going on the way, he was walking. He came to this big puddle. And it was so big, he couldn't cross without getting himself all wet. Along came a guy. A guy came along, picked up Reish Lakish because they recognized who he was as this Gadol Torah, put him on his shoulders, carried him across the puddle. And while he was still walking, it must have been a pretty big puddle. Sha'aluhu Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish asked this guy, Wait a minute, didn't you ever learn Torah? In other words, you yourself, look, just because I have Torah, didn't you ever learn Torah? Amar Lohen, yes, of course I've learned Torah. Chazar v'sha'alu. So Reish Lakish asked him again, Mishnah? Have you learned Mishnah, not just Torah? Analo, he answered him, Shalamad arba'a starim shel Mishnah. He learned 4 out of the 6 sections of Mishnah. What's Reish Lakish's problem here? Why is he asking all this? He's feeling very bad. He said, if this guy is carrying me over the water, it's only because he recognizes my Torah. And in a sense, I'm using my Torah for my personal gain, to be carried across the water. So he's trying to assess who this person is that's carrying him. Amar lo Reish Lakish, Reish Lakish said to him, Atala mata dalet starim. You learned 4 sections of Mishnah. It's like you cut down 4 giant mountains, meaning you've accomplished so much. You're carrying me on your shoulders? Why would you do that? In other words, it's not a matter of humility. The greatness of Reish Lakish was that he was a very humble person. And he was saying, how dare you carry me? I'm using my Torah for personal gain, it seems. And not only that, you're also Talmud Chacham. Throw me into the water. Amar lo, so the guy said, he said, what are you talking about? I'm just so happy I'm able to help out a great person such as yourself. Amar lo Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish saw the guy is not going to let him go into the water. So he had to do something to kind of even the playing field. Im Kain, he said to him, I'm going to teach you on halacha. Why? So that then you're going to be considered my student. And then if you're my student, then you're going to be allowed to serve me or help me. There will be no prohibition in what you're doing. So we learn quite a bit from this action of Reish Lakish, that number one is we don't want to make the Torah something we make use of for our own personal gain. Number two, that when a person is a talmid of a greater individual, he's allowed to serve him and do things for him, even though it may appear that he's doing it and benefiting rather from the use from his Torah. But tachlis, what's he really giving honor to? The Torah that Reish Lakish learned. It may seem differently, but that's really what he's doing. Okay, so now we can go back to this. Let's just read this and understand the basic idea of what it's saying here. Okay. Hu Omer, this is the 3rd Mishnah of Hillel, and what he says. He used to say, Im ein ani li, mi li. If I'm not for myself, who is for me? It's me. But if I'm only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? If not now, when? The first 2 clauses or sentences seem connected, obviously. The third one seems disjointed. It doesn't seem necessary to be a part of this. Maybe it's not. So let's first just understand the basic ideas, what's being said here, before we go into any kind of iyun or depth. Rav Steinsaltz, in his commentary on Pirke Avot, which came out just a few months ago, by the way, which was nice for me, said as follows: that when it says "Im ein ani li, mi li," if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? He's basically saying that if I don't expect for other people to help or save you when you need to be. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're falling down. You don't want people to help you, but it's referring to the topic of hishtadlut, known as hishtadlus, or doing your due diligence. If I want to be a Rosh Hashanah, I don't. But let's say I want to be a Rosh Hashanah. I can't just sit around waiting for a yeshiva to call me and say, you know what, Zev, we know you learned some Torah. Why don't you come be the Rosh Hashanah here? It doesn't work that way. I need to stand up for myself. I need to, if I really am interested in a particular position, I have to do my due diligence, my hishtadlut. I have to go to yeshiva, or if there's a job I'm looking for, I have to do. You can't just wait for they're going to come to me. It doesn't work that way in life. That's just on the very simplistic level that Rav Steinmetz is telling us. Uchshani la'atzmi does not necessarily reflect, he said, directly as a continuation of the first sentence, but rather he says like this: a situation where I am so self-centered, egotistical, self-absorbed, narcissistic. Who am I? What is it? What kind of person am I? Right? That's a horrible way to live. Unfortunately, I've come across a few bona fide narcissists in my life. It's pretty scary. But he says, in spite of your needing to do your hishtadlus, to do your due diligence and your own growth, you have to understand that you're not alone, that you need to be a part of the people. You need to be part of a society. We start off by saying, if I'm only for myself, if I'm not for myself, who am I? Who's going to be for me? Then we say, when I'm only for myself, what am I? But the continuation of that idea is that when I have to understand that while I'm doing my hishtadlut, shani latzmi, when I'm working for myself and I'm doing for myself, ma'ani means I can't do it alone. I need the help. I need other people there to. So in other words, it could be looked at as self-absorbed, self-centered, narcissistic, or it's a statement like, you have to understand you can't do this by yourself. Yes, you have to be for yourself, but at the same time, understand when I am for myself, I have to understand I'm not alone. I have people I can turn to. I can get people with help. Let me just see if I have this here. I said, make a note here. It says slide. We'll come back to that. Okay. And finally, the third statement is V'im lo achshav ematay. If not now, when? The general meaning of that last statement is two words in English. Don't procrastinate. Now, don't procrastinate in the context of this Mishnah means, because this Mishnah is about growth also, as was the last Mishnah. This Mishnah is about personal growth. Don't procrastinate. Don't put off to tomorrow what you could put off to the day after tomorrow. Don't put up to tomorrow what you can do today. When you see that you need to stand up for yourself, to do your hishtadlut, when you see that you're trying and it's not working, you need help, don't put it off. If you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? This very much clicks with another statement in the Mishnah coming up, which we're not going to do in the very near future. It says, Al tomar, don't say, Lichshefne eshne, when I have the time, I'll learn. Shema lo tipanet, maybe you won't end up with the time. I've had many people I've talked to over the years who say, yeah, I really have planned, when I find time, I am going to sit down and I'm going to make time to sit down and learn Mishnah every day. Or I'm going to learn halacha every day. Or I'm going to learn daf yomi. But I got to find that time. So I have something I do with some of my students who, let's say they're struggling with Hebrew, with Ivrit. So I say, let me ask you a question. By the time you finish school, until the time you go to sleep, what do you do? So many of them will say, I'm on my phone, I'm out with friends, I'm YouTube, whatever it might be. And I say, okay, during that time period of your 6 or 7 hours of that, do you think you could find 10 minutes? Well, sure I can. There are very few people on earth, very, very, very few, who can honestly, truly say they have absolutely no time to do something. It's nearly impossible. They say that I didn't make this up. It's an old adage that says, you want something done, give it to someone who's busy. Because they're already a person who likes to do. So the more the person learns, the more they're going to want to learn more. It goes back to the last mission. And so, if you don't start, when are you going to start? Some of you know that a story that happened to me a couple of years ago, that I had picked up a sefer that was a page-a-day learning of Shulchan Aruch, to go through the entire Shulchan Aruch in 1 year, all 4 volumes of the Shulchan Aruch, or 4 sections. And the top of each page started with the first day of Tishrei, and Bet Tishrei, 3 Tishrei, and I had gotten it in the summer. And I said, okay, I'm put it on my shelf, and I said, I'm going to wait until beginning of Rosh Hashanah, and I'm going to start it then. I said, that's in Loach Shaveh Matai, and that's, I'll say when I have the time, I'll learn. No. So I sat down, so that by the time I got to Rosh Hashanah, I was already finished with the first volume. That's not saying, wow, look what I did. Big deal. Really big deal. Who cares? But the point being is that when you do decide to do something and you get off the stick and you do it, you tend to stick with it and you go with it. And if you don't and you procrastinate and you say, I'll get to it, it's not going to happen. That's true not only with Torah, it's true in daily life. And if you listen, if you ever have taken a class or watched online, learned or observed people who learn how to take care of their time, how to really work with their daily clock, so to speak, and schedule. One of the things they say is that when you know that you're the freshest of the day, some people, their brains are the best first thing in the morning. I can tell you I'm clearest first thing in the morning, and definitely not in the evening. So at the time you're the clearest headed and freshest in your abilities, tackle the hardest thing you need to do that day. You have this report you have to write. You have an email to send. You have something you want to learn. Do it and do it at the right time. Work with your body clock and then work around that to get to the next things you need to do. And again, that's im lo achshav imatai. So I want to share with you this. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I'll read it. Okay, I have a commentary on the Pirke Avot by, I can't remember his first name, Shanan. Forgot his first name. Yeah, I'll look it up. That he gives a little bit of an interesting perspective of this whole idea of, and we haven't really gone into much depth yet. I know that we're going to do that next week, but I'm going to read this to you. We get a little bit of understanding of additional meaning to this, not just the simplistic meaning, but something maybe a little bit broader. האנושית מלמדת שאין אדם יכול לחיות בבדידות מוחלטת ואנוכיות חיצונית. We have learned, humanity has taught us that a person cannot live in complete isolation, nor to an extremely connection just to themselves. Enochiyut is ego, that's all about them. Im kach, ach gam, kollektiviyut muchletet, המוחקת את דמותו של הבודד לחלוטין, היא דבר פגום. But a situation, a complete collective situation, which erases the individual completely, is also terrible. פסול ובלתי אפשרי. יש למצוא את דרך הביניים. You have to find the middle path. המשלבת את האם אינני לי מילי, that on the one side, I have to be for myself, יחד עם וכשאני לעצמי מען. On the other hand, what is the idea of when I'm only for myself, what am I? And that's what Hillel has taught us. היהדות נתנה ביטוי לצורך בשילוב זה בכמה דרכים. So Judaism gives us this comes to fruition, the expression of it is seen in a number of things, the shiluv, this combination of these two extremes. One example he's going to give us has to do with daven. We know that everyone has to daven. You have to pray. Adif im kilo הכרח גמור מוחלט, שזאת תיעשה במסגרת יחד, במניין מתפללים, 10 ומעלה. It's best, with except certain circumstances, that it's done in a certain misgeret, a certain framework of a togetherness in a minyan. המשנה קובעת, כי בהיעדר מניין, אין הכהנים מברכים את העם במסגרת התפילה. We know, for example, that Kohanim cannot, among other things, he's going to list for us, Kohanim don't, what we call duchen, they don't do birkat Kohanim when there's no minyan. Ein korim b'Torah or haftarah. You can't read the Torah publicly. You can't say haftarah with brachot. Ein orim et brachot tenemarot mitachat l'chuppah. You can't make the sheva brachot without a minyan. Ve'od. So there's this idea of a community, a certain togetherness and biyachad. The yachadim is at the same time. Gamim mitpalel b'chidut. Even a person who davens by themselves. Chayav tamid lirot et atzmo kechelek min haklal. You should still see yourself as part of the general population. By the way, that means if you daven at home, I was sick the last couple of days, and a couple of tefillot, like Shacharit Dayan daven, which I hate, davened at home, and I time it to daven with the same time someone's davening at shul. That's how you're supposed to. That's one of the halachot to tefillah. If you can, when you daven by yourself, you should time it to do the same time when there's davening at a minyan at shul. Okay, therefore, therefore, the way the rabbis coined the bracha that we say is in plural. Which means that you would think we're blessed Hashem, that you have sanctified us with his mitzvot and commanded us. Theoretically, when you make a bracha, you should say, Asher kidashti b'mitzvotav v'tzivani. You have made me holy and you have commanded me. But it's not. It's for part of the cloud. So on the one hand, we're the individual. That's imani, einani b'kmili. And on the other hand, we are part of the cloud. We're part of the general population. And that's the vitzivan. Even a woman who's lighting her Shabbat candles alone at home, or a person who's walking alone by himself on the road, even though you're by yourself, the bracha is still said in plural. To always be aware that the yachid, the individual, is also part of the yachad, the collective, which is a beautiful way of putting it. So that's I would say, the surface meaning of this particular Mishnah. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, will continue. We'll look a little bit more in depth at what some deeper meanings behind these phrases and pick it up from there. Again, we pray that those who were injured this morning should have, and through the war as well, have a refuah shlema and neshama for the one who was killed today in the pigua. And let's hear Besarot Avot. Bezrat Hashem. Everyone have a good day and best to everybody.